How's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 185. I did a Skype interview with Dr. Cami Fletcher. She's a death scholar and historian and president of the Collective for Radical Death Studies. She teaches history at Albright College. Her specialty is African American deathways and death work. She's the author of a book, Real Business, Maryland's First Black Cemetery Journeys into the Enterprise of Death. And she has a book coming up April 2020 that she's a co-editor on. It's Till Death Do Us Part, American Ethnic Cemeteries as Borders Uncrossed. So she and I talked about all sorts of things, history, death, the African American experience, Jim Crow, slavery, undertakers, all sorts of things. So great. I'm really excited for you to hear this episode. She has some wonderful suggested reading and a documentary that she also suggested. I'm going to put all that stuff on the links page on heyhumanpodcast.com and definitely pre-order her book. Yeah, so usual stuff, Hey Human Podcasts on Instagram and Facebook. And I personally can be found Susan Ruthism, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can check out my other life, my painting and music and stuff at susanruth.com. I am no longer part of the Amazon portal. I'm apparently in Amazon portal jail, the affiliates program jail. Trying to work that out. I did links wrong or something. I don't know. Something happened, and they are very specific about their requirements. So if you wish to support Hey Human, please do so by using the donate button on the heyhumanpodcast.com website on the main page. Donations are always greatly appreciated. They help support the show and keep it running. And so there's that. You can email me, Susan at heyhumanpodcast.com. Always please rate and review Hey Human on iTunes and wherever you listen to your podcasts. And that's, I think, pretty much that. Thank you for listening. This comes out on Thanksgiving in America. So I wish big tidings and blessings to all of you. For those of you who are not with family or friends for Thanksgiving, maybe you're working or maybe you are alone, you're not alone. Just want to say that if you can hear my voice, I'm thinking of you. And I love you and I want all the best things for you. So let's move into the new year with love in our hearts. And here is to even better times ahead. Thanks, everybody. Here we go. Dr. Cami Fletcher, welcome to Hey Human.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to talk with you because your work is in something that I am fascinated with and have been fascinated with for a long time. So you're a death scholar and a historian, and you're part of the Order of the Good Death. Is that correct?
Well, we are partners with them. Okay. So the Collective for Radical Death Studies officially launched in September of this year, of 2019, and so grateful to have partners already. So the Order of Good Death is one of our official partners. You can see all of this on our website, Comfort Homesake, Mari Nurtures, and there's a wonderful death center out of the University of York in Bath that's doing some phenomenal work, is also part of our partners. Yeah.
So let's go back to the beginning. Where were you raised up?
From Arkansas, a town that has a wonderful historically Black college that I attended and graduated from. So yeah, Pine Bluff, Arkansas is where I'm from.
And what began your interest in death?
Oh, long after that. So I moved to Baltimore 2009, my family and I, to pursue my PhD in history. And I was coming off of a women's studies degree. So I wanted to continue my path of learning about Black women. And I decided that I wanted to be a historian because the women that I was reading, Darlene Clark Hine, Deborah Gray White, these were women that had saw education and academia is activism, and I wanted to be a scholar activist just like them. So I attended Morgan State, and my advisor, Dr. Deborah Newmanham, was part of the restoration and preservation efforts of Mount Auburn Cemetery here in Baltimore, the oldest autonomous black cemetery in Baltimore. And I still think with my research, and we may talk about that later, in Maryland. And she was part of these efforts, and they wanted a graduate student to do this, probably because we're cheaper, or want the experience, right?
Yeah.
And, she brought it to me, and I was like, yeah, I'm a historian. I want to do this. But I was hesitant because it was like, this is death. I'm from the South, and you don't play with death. I grew up hearing with my mom having stories of her aunts and uncles coming back. This is how we talk in the Black community. Someone came back to you, and you're not dreaming. You're sitting here just like me and you see this person, they're coming back to warn you of something or to tell you about something that's good, that's going to happen. And I was like, a cemetery? But of course, my academic curiosity, and it was paying, I said that like 3 times. And I got involved, and immediately I was like, oh my God, this is such rich African-American history. Exactly what I'm trying to do as a historian. These were untouched, untapped sources. And so from there, literally, I've been studying this since maybe 2010.
Was Mount Auburn one of the first or the first black cemetery?
So in Baltimore, absolutely, because it was founded in 1807.
And when I say that, I mean owned by black people, not owned by the plantation or
Right, and I make that point too to say autonomous. It was an autonomous black cemetery. These church that owns it, Sharp Street Methodist Church. It wasn't AME or AME Zion. This was organically attached to the Methodist Church. Okay, so Sharp Street Church is the oldest black Methodist church, African Methodist church in Baltimore. And there's even some discrepancy because its roots with the racism that came with a lot of Southerners joining Methodism came the racism. Blacks in escaping this racism and resisting it, they left with their feet. They used their feet, they left. And they went to meeting in people's basements and people's homes, and this was 1787. So there's some discrepancy to say, is Mother Bethel in Philadelphia, is it the oldest, or is Sharp Street the oldest? So it has old roots. And these were Africans that petitioned to Straw Bridge, or is it Asbury, for their independence in their own church. So we're talking early on, but at the same time, these black folks wanted a cemetery as well. And so that just shows you the importance of burial and what was going on with black people being denied burial in Potter's Field and being their only option, in air quotes. So absolutely, this was supposed to be black owned, and this was always black owned and for black folks.
So during the time of slavery, were blacks allowed to practice their death rituals the way maybe a modern era person is, or was that also something that was, suppressed by the white plantation owners and such, and the communities at large? Because I imagine, and we'll get into that because obviously this is what you do, that from such a rich, steeped history of where people came from when they were taken and brought here, that in order to maintain a sense of who one is, right, you bring your tribe with you, it lives within you, inside your heart, even if the things around you don't want you to experience it. So how did they maintain that? That's always the thing, right? Africanisms, this idea that it rejects the notion that during enslavement, specifically during the transatlantic slave trade and the Middle Passage, that
Black people, that Africans lost their heritage, lost their history, lost who they were. Because during that Middle Passage process, scholars have talked about, it's not just folks getting on a boat and crossing the Atlantic, but it was a year-long process of being trekked to the ocean, staying in these dungeons for months until they filled up. The Europeans got enough, in air quotes, that they need for their greed and going to the Caribbean. That's a year-long process. So scholars have said that, this was the idea of making a slave. They didn't go over there and get slaves. Everyone wasn't a prisoner of war. This was actually making a slave. You are branding someone. You are repeatedly raping someone. You are repeatedly beating someone, right? How is someone's language supposed to survive? But this is all they had, right? This is what they have. And so these Africanisms show up in food, show up in language. If you know anything about the Gullah people or the Geechee people in North Carolina, where there was this big slave port where you have the basket weaving, that was something that survived. And like you're asking, it showed up in their death ways, right? So, scholar Rodiger, I'm blanking out on his first name, but he has this great article, To Die in Dixie. And his point is slaveholders are constantly writing about Black people and their funerals. Slaveholders are leading these funerals, which is disturbing to say the least. Sometimes they're actually, and in leading these funerals, giving time off for a funeral. They're actually providing materials to make the coffin, or allowing the carpenter on site, because these plantations are isolated in the county. And in Maryland, the Chesapeake Bay splits the state. So, on the eastern shore, it's where the counties are vast land space, not like the cities where the plantations would flourish. And so he's asking this question in his research, so these planters are constantly writing about these funerals, writing about, what's going on with death. They're also, these planters, these slaveholders are making laws about Black people gathering for funerals, not wanting them to gather. New York, Virginia, early on, 1700s, these laws are happening. What's going on? His conclusion, which is the thing to agree with, is that Black people are using death to resist. So if white folks are constantly writing about it, finding ways to get involved, finding ways to oversee and control this, then Black people are resisting. They're not saying, oh, well, we're going to acquiesce to what these whites want us to do in death. We're just going to, not do our practices. We're not going to properly bury someone. They're resisting. They're doing this. The other piece of that in this resistance is the second burials. So if someone is dropping dead from heat exhaustion, yellow fever, these diseases that's happening, and the slaveholder is not allowing time off, or if someone dies and you're not allowed to properly grieve like we think now, under the dark of night, Black folks would come in an isolated part of the plantation that scholars call these slave landscapes, where nothing is growing. So there's no field, there's no tobacco or any kind of indigo or cotton or whatever grown there. This is a space that enslaved folks have claimed as their own. And under, the cover of night, they are not only burying someone that maybe died that day, but they are memorializing. So there's ceremonies. I think William Steele, famous conductor on the Underground Railroad, in his work talks about this, and other scholars talk about this. So slave burials are hard to even find now, because they were meant to be anonymous, meant to be hidden. This hidden history. Lynn Rainville talks about this in her work. But to your point, it happened. And we know it happened looking at, these white planters and slaveholders in their works because they were controlling the narrative so much so that they were writing about it. Yeah.
I think something you just said, to me at least, is so poetic: death as resistance. If I think about, especially as it's depicted in the media, maybe that sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between a celebratory function and a death function in the Black culture of what's been portrayed in the media, at least for me. And that idea that under this sort of cover that you actually get to scream the loudest, whether it's in joy or in sorrow. I love that. That image to me is so beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about like death. When you look at death in the Black community, is completely shrouded with racism, oppression, systematic violence, lynching, white violence, the idea that in slavery you own somebody's body, so you're allowed to decide when they live and die. You have to understand all of that. And this is where the Collective for Radical Death Studies is about putting marginalized communities, putting people of color and their death, dying, grieving, disposal of the body, whether it's cremation or, burial, in the center of that. So you take all of that and you understand that in your question of, is this celebrating, is this mourning, it's all of it. I'm sure you saw, let's go back a couple of years now. I think it's actually been a year, no, maybe two, Aretha Franklin, when she passed away. And this is where Black mourning culture is put on display. Carla Holloway and her amazing work passed on. And at CRDS, the Radical Death Studies, we have a Rad Death Reads, where we identify a read and we go on Twitter and we interact with it. It's like a book club. It is, but it's not just for books. In her book, she talks about this. That in that mourning, in that homegoing, it's absolutely a celebration. We are celebrating this person's life, their accomplishments. To white society, she may have only been a singer. Or this person may be a thug, in quotes, a criminal, in quotes. No, this was my brother. This was my father. This was a complicated, three-dimensional person that deserves to be a person. And in that homegoing, in the shouting and the singing, is a way to heal, is absolutely a way to mourn, and Black folks need 6 hours. We need 6 hours for our homegoing ceremony is what I'm saying. It's not a quick 30-minute, 1 hour. We need all of that, we need that space to get all of that out. So it's celebration of life. And I think that may be the confusion. Nobody's celebrating a death. We're celebrating a life. And we're trying to heal and call attention to this death that we think shouldn't have happened, which is, almost a lead into my research on RIP t-shirts that people I don't think people really understand what's going on with those. And I myself, admittedly, really didn't.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so the RIP t-shirts, and there's multiple names for them now, celebration of life tees, mourning tees, but commonly called RIP t-shirts, rest in peace. So you may see celebrities walking around. I think I saw, who did I just see with a jacket? My goodness, I was on Instagram and I just saw someone with a jacket. I think it was Puff Daddy, Diddy. His the love of his life, if you go on his Instagram, the mother of his children, Kim Porter, passed away a year ago. That's what it was, a year anniversary of her passing. Denim jacket airbrushed with her, I think, him on the back, or maybe it was two pictures of her on the back of his jacket. So I think white society doesn't understand and doesn't know what they're looking at. And that happens with a lot of what Black culture is, if it's our hair, our dress, our food. And when my nephew was tragically murdered 2 years ago now. Literally 2 years ago in November, I was thrust in that mourning circle. And because he was only 28, and the RIP t-shirts definitely has roots in the youth. I don't understand why my nephew's 28 and he's not here. And so with that happening, his mother decided to do the RIP t-shirts, and I decided to be a mourner and a death scholar all in one to help my own grieving and my own coping. And I think the big takeaways from that is it's activism. Once again, these are historically has been Black young males that have been that have died due to street crime, police brutality. And how the narrative gets shaped is that this Black person was involved in street crime. Okay, if they were, so what? We have to look at a system that oppresses Black youth due to the education system that's failing them, due to the housing system that has ignored their parents and their whole community and their situation, that a life of crime, selling drugs, has been the only option that's been allotted to them.
Right.
And, it's also been combined with police brutality. So that shirt is saying, we know what has happened to our loved one. He is loved. He or she, but traditionally is male dominated. But this person is loved, is missed, and we are telling you through our shirt how this person died, if it's police brutality, and that we're wearing their likeness as a memorial. Many times, unlike the white community, and I say this in my Jim Crow research, where whites will just build a monument to whatever Southern Confederate general for them not to be forgotten. That type of capital is lost on this particular population that I'm talking about of Black folks. And so it becomes a walking memorial. I am memorializing this person, similar to the way that, class and racialized whites are allowed to build monuments, to name schools after, get scholarships in the name of these people. So there's a lot going on with memory and ritual with RIP t-shirts.
How did your own nephew's death weave its way into your understanding of death before and then after? By the way, I'm sorry for your loss. That's so young.
Yeah, thank you. It was directly with the t-shirts, honestly, because of his age, his mother decided to do that. Now, my brother recently passed away tragically, October 9th. And we did not do t-shirts. He was 55. So with my nephew and doing these t-shirts, I wanted to know, why are we doing this? Where does this ritual come from? Does it have roots in the broader mourning ritual that we do with homegoing, that we do with the repast, these mourning things that Black folks do, what's going on in that? So, I used, again, myself as a mourner, looking around at us doing it. And then, again, looking at other research and how clothing, is used, the act of wearing, what does that mean? I found myself looking at 19th century Victorian mourning rituals of wearing the hair. So I just got into this idea of like cloth, and I'm still looking into it. I'm still doing this, but definitely being a memorial was something that just seems to pop out in the research, and definitely people being young. Recently, where was this? There was a shooting in. There's so many now, it's ridiculous. Was it Dallas? Was it San Antonio? Maybe last year there was a shooting somewhere in Texas. Mm-hmm. And okay, so you know what I'm talking about. This is ridiculous that it's so many. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna agree. It's so hard to keep track anymore. There's just so many.
And what they did with the T-shirts, and I'm putting this into my own research, was along the fence of like the football field, and there's a wonderful newspaper article on it. And this one may have been him in Maryland, because I think it's traveling. And again, it's this idea of the memorial. You take it down, put it up, it's traveling. But the point is, they put these T-shirts, and white T-shirts, and they just put the age of the person on it. And there were hundreds, maybe 200 of these T-shirts along the gate to symbolize the absence. These are teenagers, these are supposed to be kids that are at the school, but they put them along, the gate of the school. And when you're talking about children and you're talking about young people in that way, it's sobering, and it should make America take notice of how these people are dying, gun violence, and then what's going on, in the Black community, this systematic violence that's going on. So that's why that memorial, and it's not a celebration. Black people are not just walking around with these T-shirts because we're celebrating our loved ones are gone. It's to symbolize that these kids are no longer here, this absence. And I think, showing, America that children are dying from gun violence or, systematic racism, oppression, and that's the memorial that I was talking about, because it's traveling. I know it is, because it was to talk about the shooting that happened in Texas, but some students had gotten together and were active and mobilized to do it in Maryland, to bring attention to this very issue. There's nothing like, having a T-shirt, because everybody wears a T-shirt, but kids don't normally wear suits and formal wear. So, just looking at the use of it is so important.
I think it makes me think of in the Jewish culture, when someone dies and they tear their clothing, that there's a history of little signs and symbols on the clothing in different, especially in oppressed groups and oppressed minorities, that have to have their own code in order to speak with each other. And I think a lot about the shouting as well, that you mentioned, and I think part of it almost as if to say, can you hear me, trying to get through the veil from the living to the dead. And so wailing and shouting, and the demonstration is almost in a way to bust through that barrier between life and death.
I mean, for the Black community, like, again, if you're thinking about the African experience in America, it has been about exploiting Black folks' labor, completely dehumanizing them. So this idea that Black people don't feel because we're not humans, we are not experiencing mourning in the ways that white people are. There's a lot of research on that, about how Black women, doctors were experimenting on Black women during slavery. They thought that Black women were just, they could just shoot out babies, like cattle would. So, you take that and you fast forward to today, or, 20th, even the 20th century, and it's this idea that Black people are just, you don't have the same care and you don't have the same concern. And that's even overlaid with the pathology. This death that has happened in the Black community, they brought it on themselves. The crime, the inadequate housing, the lack of jobs, the uneducated, this is a pathology. This is something that they brought onto themselves. So when Black people are dying in these ways, specifically with police are just killing Black people. I mean, that's what it is. Nobody has a gun. This man is sitting in his house. Stephon Clark was in the backyard at his grandmother's. And there's so many names. The last gentleman was in his house in Texas. The white female cop just shot him in his home. And it's not that type of outcry. Nobody's, oh my God, I cannot believe that this happened. I think
when she was found guilty, and thank God she was found guilty, as she should have been. That was the whole mess of all of it. And I think what is the most cringeworthy thing I hear, especially because, I lived in the South for 13 years. And one of the most cringeworthy things I heard was, well, it's been, X amount of years. Why does everybody just get over it? And I think, firstly, it should be an only in front of that word of how many years. It wasn't. And in fact, it's not like it's stopped. It's just changed what it looks like. It's been recalibrated into a normalcy. And that's perhaps even more horrendous. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to, not more horrendous than slavery, don't get me wrong. What I mean is that normalcy of, oh, well, that just happens. Or like you said, oh, they brought it on themselves. Or I think when that language starts, it's such a dangerous, language is dangerous. And how it's how it's facilitating. We see that all the time now. Yeah. Yeah.
No, absolutely. We're in the legacy of slavery. We still have the same norms, behaviors. They've, as you say, adjusted to the resistance that destroyed slavery, the resistance that destroyed Jim Crow. Michelle Alexander in her book, The New Jim Crow, she talks about this: mass incarceration is the new Jim Crow. And then the police violence, if you see this violence that's resulting in Black death and there's no outcry, then that's what I'm saying with going back to your point about the wailing in the morning. I am here. Hear me. I am mourning. Someone died that meant a lot to me. But if white society only sees the stereotype of the brute, the hooded Black male that I'm so fearful of, that's the only person I'm fearing. Not these white males that are shooting up schools. I'm just fearful of this Black male in a hoodie. I'm fearful of this Black woman. I'm fearful of these kids. These are stereotypes. Brute, Jezebel, Sapphire, pick an any. Then our mourning takes a different shape. In that we are trying to say that we are hurting. We are trying to heal collectively, because that's the only way that we're going to heal. There's no outside support coming. We can't expect for, white society to validate our mourning rituals or to, give us any type of support. It's just looked at as the other. It's different. And so in that has been a shaping of what Black mourning looks like.
Do you feel that, for me, when I just hearing things we just talked about, the idea of it's almost, the leaning in, the embracing of a death and shouting about it and saying this person existed, this is a human being.
Yeah.
Versus, I think in white culture and European culture, death is to be feared. There is this huge movement to fight death every step of the way, whether it's by physically altering one's body or the workout culture or the vitamin culture or all the food diets or whatever it is. There's this immense fear of death in the Eurocentric culture versus your culture, the culture of the Black human.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I found myself in, as we started off this conversation. It was like, you're a death scholar, you're a historian. I just saw myself as a historian of African American history, and I am, continuing to understand the African experience in America. Write about this, and writing about cemeteries, writing about the church, writing about burial was in line with that. It was only until I began to understand this broader conversation that was happening in death studies, and I came to claim myself as a death scholar, that I said, death denial, a good death, these are the prevailing notions in death studies. And I thought, death denial, death disappearance, when you hear scholars talking about this, the books and the things, exactly what you're saying, interdisciplinary, I thought, what is going on here? You can't deny something that is so very much a part of your life, that your very existence. You cannot deny that. And I understand the literature is this idea of hospice care and death going into the hospitals, that it's no longer in the home. People don't necessarily die in the home, and then the family, cares for the body and the person is buried in the backyard, that's been pushed out of the home. But I think when you look at, again, the ways that people of color are dying, the rituals reflect that. I was on Twitter when the young 7-year-old girl at the border died. And it was discussion about ICE agents there was a picture kicking over the water that this nonprofit organization had left, at the border for people that are coming, these families that are coming. And the death ritual that spawned out of this young girl from somewhere, I'm not sure if she was Mexico or, somewhere even further. And I went to Twitter and I said, this is what radical death studies is about. These folks are mourning. And the ritual that they're doing now, whatever that is, because it was an article that I was attaching to that tweet, is about them dealing with this 7-year-old girl's death and the colonialism, the xenophobia, the racism that resulted in that girl dying. So it's not about, I am, fighting back against this institution that's saying I have to do hospice care. And that's the whole thing about death denial. No, this is about people trying to deal with the little girl that should be here right now. So again, with the Collective for Radical Death Studies, our questions are not about death directives. It's not about people need to have wills and people need to, control their death. It is about Black people don't want to die, we want to live. And we want to call attention to the senseless ways in which we're dying and look and have validity to our rituals. If somebody's walking around with an RIP t-shirt at Walmart, which is very common where I'm from in Pine Bluff, and I'm sure, places here where I live now in Maryland, it's not about, what is that about? It's respecting their ritual. So to me, it's a gamut, and you have to understand and respect.
Will you talk a little bit more about the death ritual within the community of the Black person, just besides the shirt, but just even a beloved dies, regardless of what their life was, as you spoke to it, because who we are in life isn't who we are in death. Death is the great equalizer. If, you go to a cemetery and everyone is in the ground, I went into a forensic lab, and you see all these bones of people. You don't know what color they are, you don't know what religion they are, you don't know what sexual orientation, you don't know. It's this great equalizer. And perhaps that's one of the reasons people fear death, is because suddenly they're not special anymore, You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of it, the psychology, I don't know. But what is some of the rituals?
Yeah, Susan, I have to say this. In my work, I have really taken on that idea that death is the great equalizer. I don't believe that anymore. My recent project on Jim Crowing the dead, the lengths that Southern whites are going to separate and justify the separation of burial and death is just insane, absurd, and it's all laid out in the newspaper articles. So, you also have slaveholders. In my book that's out in April, Till Death Do Us Part, one of the contributors talks about slaveholders maintaining their image in death via the cemetery, via the epitaph, via how big the monuments are. So, I kind of push back against that. Let's have a conversation about that. Of course, the segregation, even though we're all in the ground, even the money, the class with the monuments, what part of the section you're in, are you closer to the church or are you closer to the water? All of this stuff. So
for me, that's all the living doing that. That's the thing. It's like, yes, I completely 1000% agree with you that is still the living. What I'm talking about is when I was in a room with dozens and dozens and dozens of human bones and looking at them all, in that moment, we are all human. It's the living that then continues the bullshit. The living continues all that stuff. Seriously, I mean, for a great example, when you brought up the officer, former officer killing, I can't think of his name. Again, there's so many names now. They all tumble in my brain, but which is disrespectful, I know, but I can't remember his name. And the witness one of the witnesses was murdered, and what I found so fascinating, and to your point, is that instead of saying, "Oh my God, this witness was murdered," they suddenly have to put together this story of how they somehow deserved it. Because they're like, oh, well, they found drugs. I was like, I don't know, throw a rock at a white person and you find somebody taking drugs. And you know what I mean? It's not an argument.
Yeah.
It's not an argument that says they deserve to be executed, for damn sure. So I do think that, yes, the living continue the bullshit, but the dead are like, what the fuck?
No, and so that's the thing, right? These communities that the living and the dead create, like, who gives it the power? Who gives it the understanding of it? Right. The dead are somewhere we cannot see them, or some people that, the spiritualists of the 19th century are convening with them, giving them that social, racial category. I'm with you, laying it out that way. Maybe that's how we solve racism. We lay out a bunch of bones and tell people, everybody's equal.
If only we could solve it. I wish that as long as a human being walks the earth breathing, they will figure out how to be better than another one.
That's the thing about the equalizing, right? Like, are we or are we not? So, but even so, to your question, right? What are Black people in these rituals? Which, when you are in a culture, in a community that's so normal for you, you don't even think that this is one. But the homegoing, and it is definitely different from a funeral. I guess that's the one that I'll talk about, perhaps the repast, but great documentary. Literally, if you just search up homegoing, excellent documentary. I recommend everybody get it and watch it, about a very old funeral home in Harlem. Isaiah is either the first or the last name of the funeral home owner. And it just does a wonderful job of following him and contextualizing what's going on. But the homegoing really is the elements of it, and even going back to Carla Holloway's book, Passed On, that I recommend for everybody to grab and read, is about kind of breaking down what's happening at this ritual. And time is a big thing. First of all, if someone dies, even on a Monday, you're not going to have that funeral the weekend. Usually funerals are on a weekend. You're not even going to have it that weekend. You're going to have it the next weekend to make sure all the family gets in. As many people as can come, they're going to come. In the early 20th century, Black folks saved for this, which is why Booker T. Washington was like, Black people aren't preparing to live, they're preparing to die. Because any pendings, whatever they had, and in death, you have these elaborate funerals, right? And so to give that context is that whites were saying, we're being taken advantage of by the funeral director because it was unregulated to 75. This funeral director's charging $1,000. The next funeral director's charging $700. Somebody may charge $200, all for the same services. The digging the grave, putting the body in, the horse and carriage to get the body to the cemetery, lay the person out, in the parlor. And with Black folks, it wasn't an ostentatious funeral. This is about going home properly in death, and again, demonstrating I'm not a thug, in quotes, I'm not a mammy, I'm not just this worker of white folks. I was a community organizer. I was part of the block captain to keep the block clean. I was definitely somebody's mother, aunt, what have you. So the time, and then goes into how elaborate it was, but the time of the funeral, how long it takes to have it, and then the time of the funeral. You're not going there to be out in an hour. It's just not going to happen. Anybody that knew this person wants to get up and speak about this person. Even though there's a program, I knew him, I knew her, I want to say my 2 cents about it. And there is pushback. So I'm not saying that everybody is just, okay with this, but generally, this is what happens. And then, like I said, the ostentatious funeral is not something that you will see described with Black folks. It's, they put him home. They sent him out right. That's the word. Oh, man, yeah. Did you see how many sheriff's cars showed up? Did you see how many flowers? Did you see they had a vault over the casket? Did you see the color of that casket? Did you see the lining? Oh, did you see that suit he had on? This is what they put him out right. They sent him home right. So it's not that. And historically, the Black funeral directors weren't, getting over in quotes on people. If you didn't have the money, you could give a chicken, or exchange, because they were living in the community. It wasn't one of those businesses where I live outside of the community and I'm in my business is in the community. My business, my house, I'm in and of this community. So I think all those dynamics in the homegoing, the time, the length, how elaborate is something that's different. And preparing the body is another one. Black people expect that when someone dies, they look like themselves. So embalming, which is a hot button with the home funeral movement that's going on now, this idea of natural burial. A green burial. Somebody dies, put them back in the ground. That's kind of, not in opposition, but it's just not even contentious, but it's just it's difference. There's a difference in the Black. We need the body preserved because I want my brother to look like he looked. That's important for me. I want my mom, I want my sister, I want my nephew to look how he looked. And when you go back in the ways that Black bodies have been mangled, lynching. And with lynching, it was a ritual. Cutting off limbs, cutting off ears. White
genitalia, everything. Yeah, right.
I want to put that person back together again. Mm-hmm. It's just, and it's it's those types of things that is all part of this collective healing that we want with the homegoing. And that's, I don't even see it as a ritual, but it is. That's something, because it has these elements of who's supposed to do what, and these things that I've just described, the time. But yeah, the homegoing is a ritual.
How does a marginalized person of color within the community get treated in death? Say a transgender person of color. Does a switch get flipped and within the community? You know
what? I will say this, Susan. And you just reminded me, and let me apologize. Queer Death Studies Network is another one of our partners, and they are awesome. They just had a wonderful international conference, and I hope to interview them about it on our blog. And they also just published, like as a group, Marietta, Nina, Tara, and maybe some others as a group just published a special edition journal, literally centering the queer community in death, dying, and mourning. And so that's so important. I will say that I have not been to a funeral where I know this person was queer or trans. But homophobia runs rampant in our community, literally in America, in everyone's community. And it's so important to humanize this person and let them go out, the way that they live. And you've got me thinking now, do you watch this show on FX called Pose?
I've seen a couple clips of it. But
you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. Yeah, my best friend Ellen loves that show.
Oh, she has a right to love it. Yeah, because I love it.
She says it's awesome. She says it's exceptional, and I've seen clips of it, and so yeah.
But they do this. They go there with the funeral because AIDS. It centers in New York, Black and Brown community. It centers on them. They're telling the story, and one of their own dies, and she's been disowned by her parents. And so it's her community that funeralizes her, right? But that's not always the case, and that's something that I think the home funeral movement and natural burial movement is right about. Because when you're dealing with, and I may even get some blowback from saying this, but when you're dealing with the funeral home and funeral directors, they follow a protocol of next of kin, and they follow the protocol of who's paying the bill. Like I said, may get blowback, but that is what it is. So because of this ridiculous heteronormativity that we have, and, rolling back all the rights that anybody should have, gay marriage, if I have lived with this person for 20 years and their parents disowned them when they died, the parents want to swoop in, and especially in the trans community, and say, no, this is my son, when this person has lived their whole life as a woman, then that's where I'm saying I think natural burial has a point. Because you take out the funeral director and that kind of hierarchy of who's paying and the next of kin, type thing, to release the body from the hospital. Like, these are formal things that happen with death that I don't even think people realize, that aren't always backed up by the law. Right? Who can actually have a body and take the body and dispose of the body? And I'm not being heartless when I say dispose. I don't want to say bury, because people cremate. Some people feel like only a hospital, only a funeral home can do that. And I remember learning about, and I'm happy to answer questions or if this sparks discussion, but that's not always it. The family can have the body, and then that's with the home, with the natural movement. But those are the questions surrounding it, whether it's the Black community or whatever community, really trying to funeralize and, give a proper burial to these folks. But those are the issues, though. Those are the issues around the trans community. Are we going to let this person be funeralized and proper burial like they lived? And the ceremonies are different. Does it have to be in a church if this person didn't go to church? If the church shunned this trans person, right? Maybe it needs to be in a place where they frequented. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term celebrants. Celebrants is what they're called in the UK. And I just learned about these folks. And they work with the funeral home to have this, quote unquote, what we would call an alternative funeral. Where exactly what I'm saying. Let's say that this trans person, because of the resistance with the church, and that's generally where a funeral is held, because of the isolation from the family, then the celebrant would come in and with their loved ones, with whatever the people that are with them, when they die, create the most wonderful, meaning celebration for that person. And it's based on what that person would have wanted. It's not just we're going to kind of cookie cutter it with the church and the family type thing. I hope I'm making my point
Absolutely.
clear.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I get you.
You're following it.
And again, if anyone listening doesn't, at the end, I'll get all your information so that they can reach out to you. When I was reading, you sent me your bio, which was great, and I was able to read up a little bit. I don't like to get too far in because I want this conversation to be organic, as it has been. But I did notice something particular that you had that stood out, and it was Black female death work. And I was curious why that's set apart.
Yeah, because death work, and what I'm talking about, and now, but my research specifically is late 1900s, early 20th century. Death work is patriarchal. highly patriarchal. And again, this is where death was in the home. Who was in the home? Women were in the home. So women were the one that controlled death work. They were the ones that were mourning. They were the ones that was cleaning the bodies, whether it was male or female. But there's some discrepancy there where in some communities you had males cleaning male bodies. But as a whole, women controlled death. Calling, letting people know so-and-so has died, sending the children out, covering the clocks, in the Black community, sitting up mourning. Women controlled it. So it wasn't until death was made into a trade. So death is not about necessarily preparing the body, but it's about who's digging the grave, who has the money to have the hearse. And so all these ridiculous notions about, women can't lift a body to put it in a coffin anymore. Well, who's putting the body out in the parlor to, it's ridiculous. So men, in a very sense, and with embalming too, because embalming was science, which it came from chemistry, it came from Europe. People are trying to figure out how can we preserve this body from a very scientific, like this is the origins of it, a very scientific way. We want to study the body. They don't have plastic skeletons and plastic body parts like we have now. So how long can we preserve this body to study it? And so it just developed into embalming, right? Because we're trying to preserve the body. And it really was popularized with Lincoln when he, was assassinated, his body going all around the country. And so men were at the head of that. They just was at the head of it, similar with childbirth. Women were delivering babies, women have babies. All of a sudden it became a study, a science, medicine, gynecology. Now men are doing it with forceps, right? So in that regard, women were definitely pushed out. But for me, when I started studying undertakers in the early, like I said, the late 1900s and early 20th century, I saw these men because many businesses were named, it was a name, whether it was a carpentry business, a door making, light making, it was somebody's name. So it was like, Robert Elliott Undertaking. And all of a sudden, early 1900s, 1910s, these women just popped out of my work. Like, where did these 20 women come from? And they were mother and daughter teams, or funeral directresses. Love that. So what's going on here in 1916 that like all these women, particularly in Baltimore? And so, again, I learned that research that I just kind of laid out to you, and that men were dying. They died. The patriarch died. The brother died, or this woman married into the family. But they were taking over and growing these organizations. And so society wasn't really seeing them in the same way that they don't see women. Einstein's wife was a wife. All these men out here publishing all of these books, and they got 3 kids. How are you doing that? Don't do that. And so they are absolutely undertakers. So it's important to distinguish that these were Black women, because of the racism and, making sure, and there were differences too. There was differences in, I guess we could say, white women's death work, definitely in the literature, just highlighting that Black women are here too, and they're also doing this work for their community. In maybe some similar ways that, like, there's a wonderful scholar that has written on white women, but I don't think she racializes it, but it's white women in the 19th century and how they're using their deathbed as a pulpit. And it's just fascinating research where this woman, because she's on her deathbed, she's allowed to have a voice, and it's multiple women, and how these priests are writing about them and putting them in the center, and they're it's a pulpit. So in those kind of creative ways, or spiritualism, right? The rappings and the tappings, the white women are allowed to convene with the dead and have this voice, right? I'm saying, hey, here are Black women they're not necessarily doing that, even though we could argue that Harriet Tubman was a spiritualist. But there's dozens of Black women that are undertakers and doing this work and passing it on to their daughters.
And spiritualism, the movement of that in the 19th century, I think that it's definitely female centric. I mean, there are so many wonderful books about that. Absolutely. Yeah. I'll have to get a book list from you, some recommended, besides the ones that you already mentioned. But books are a good segue. So you wrote a book, Real Business, Maryland's First Black Cemetery Journeys into the Enterprise of Death. And then co-editor of the one that's coming up, right? Till Death Do Us Part, American Ethnic Cemeteries as Borders Uncrossed. I almost got that wrong. All right, so let's talk about what's coming. The April 2020 book. Talk about that.
Yeah, so Till Death Do Us Part, American Ethnic Cemeteries as Borders Uncrossed. We're trying to be savvy there with our title. Just kind of goes back to what we were saying, like, is death really equal, right? And, we see ourselves as having like this really simple question: why are we okay with death still being segregated and or separated? If I tell somebody, or they may even assume that I'm going to a Black funeral home, it's like, okay, that's okay. And even in 2019, like, that's okay, to still go to this kind of separated, segregated place. And so the book, it's a collection of essays. We talk about Polish Americans. We talk about Jewish peoples, African American peoples. We talk about New Mexico, New Spain. And all of this is 19th century. We talk about Muslim. And we talk about white Americans. And I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss anyone. White Americans, I think they're, okay. And we talk about the South in an interesting way. And we look specifically at the 19th century because that's when a lot of immigrants are here. That's when America is like, are we Americans? The melting pot, all of that's happening. And so we center on death as a way that, like the Polish, for example, are using death to assimilate, to acculturate, to push back against that idea. And so it's really this idea of looking at death and how are we creating an American identity? That's honestly what this book, and we're looking at each chapter, we're looking at that. And I feel like it's a very creative way for folks to look at social history. People don't look at death as a way of knowing, as a way of, understanding. And we're saying it's a way of understanding borders that are artificial, borders that are real. Especially in a time like now, we're hyper focused on our nation's southern border, and putting up borders between races, or focused on it even more, and borders with class. We're looking at death to try to say people have kicked those borders down. Some people have erected them on their own right. You think you put this border up? No, really, I put this border up to keep you out. Honestly, my chapter is looking at a lot of that. I'm hoping folks come away with it going, well, that's an interesting way to understand who America is right now.
Again, as I said at the beginning, death to me is one of the most fascinating subjects. How we deal with death, how we perceive our own death, how we perceive others' death, how death has been used as a tool for so long by so many cultures. And it's not like that stopped, obviously, as we've talked about, but just go around the world and, death is quite the commodity. So, I just find it fascinating. I am also very curious about something you said in the beginning, and I don't want to take all of your time, but of course I could talk about the subject forever. But
I could too.
When we first started talking, you said something about the dead coming to you in the culture, in the Black culture. I know it's very strong in in Colombia and Mexico. The idea of the dead with warnings or tidings and things. I'd love to talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, so I think to bring some context to, what we're talking about is in the African diaspora, millions of Africans were forcibly left Africa, and they went to the Americas, North America, Central America, South America. Many went to Brazil. Slavery was not ended in Brazil till the 1888. So these ideas went with them. About debt. So when people, talk about Santeria, or if they talk about, it's African cultural norms that I've also adopted, with what's going on with the native people that were there as well, But this idea of the dead, and the person didn't necessarily come to me. But this was a story that was passed on by my mom. So on my mom's side, my maternal grandfather, his brother, Van, and forgive me, Mom, if I got the story wrong, but I really think it was my uncle, my great uncle Van, came back, and it's like my granddaddy sat up in the bed, or, he was sitting there, and Uncle Van didn't say anything to him, and he just walked through the door. He walked through this closet door. Which is for my grandfather to follow him. And he did, and he found $20 in his coat jacket. So it's those kind of stories that, have always been running around my family, and they're believed. And that's the thing, like it's believed. It's not that it's like, oh, so-and-so's crazy, they've been in that juice too much. It's just they're believed, and you, even now, and I know this is like an American thing, because I've heard more than, Black people or even of color people say that someone dies, oh, I have another angel now. I have somebody watching over me now. So, but people coming back, my mom was born in 1942. So she would tell me stories of this, but this did not happen to me. But they're believed. And I guess that's the point that I just want to make. Or tell me, what were you thinking about it?
I mean, I think that is an important point, that they are believed, that it is not, that the tether is by no means snipped when someone takes their last breath.
Yeah, and there's just story after story, with, and again, and I don't know, because I haven't scholarly researched that type of in that line, this idea of the tether, or this idea of that type of communication. Mm-hmm. So I haven't necessarily even researched and saw what people have, but it's so common to hear in the Black community. When my nephew, was just tragically murdered, my sister would see him, and, her interpretation was always, really want to make sure I'm okay. I can smell his cologne. And it could be interpreted that, he lived in that room. He sprayed cologne all the time. So, of course, it's still there. You know what I mean? And I don't want to,
For me, I do believe that the dead communicate with us, because I think they're the corpus. I think that the mortal coil has been shuffled off. Yes, but I don't think that the being is gone by any means.
Yeah,
and
that was her thing.
Yeah, and in some ways they're more powerful. Their ability to communicate with us becomes bigger, whether it's because it is kinetic within us, or that they somehow can manipulate wherever they are. I don't know. For me, I believe that, because I myself have had so many experiences that to deny it at this point in my life would be insane.
Yeah. And I like that, because I know that we give credence and a lot of power to the dead. So if this person has decided to show him or herself to me, there's meaning. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to keep, interacting with this. But I think in today's society, and I don't know if science is it, or what's I I don't know what's kind of countering it, or why they can't both stand on their own equally.
Right.
But you can't tell people this stuff.
Yeah, and when my ancestors pass away, I am a part of them. Their DNA is my DNA. When I love someone in life, that creates a bond that it's impossible to break that. And when that person dies, we have become each other. And you know what I'm saying? It's deeper. The connection is deeper, and I truly believe that we are all the same person. We are all connected. And so when you pass or I pass, that because of that connection, if I needed to get some sort of a message to you or vice versa, that line is there because the family tree began at some point in the roots, in the soil or whatever, and grew out, and we might all be on all these different branches in the modern world, but our lineage, our DNA, the very pulse of who we are began in the same place. We're in. Yeah, but we're linked.
You know what though? That comes from an understanding that life and death is cyclical, and I think that's what you're saying. That's even what a lot of the pushback, with the natural burial and stuff. I think they're trying to push back against that, rightly so. That life and death is connected. You keep existing. But if you don't have that, like if you honestly don't believe that, you know what I mean? You believe that life is life and death is death, and so there's no in between.
Yeah, and I'm all about people believing whatever it is they need or want or have or whatever. That's fine, especially in terms of life and death. I mean, those are big concepts.
Yeah.
These are not easy concepts. Yeah. And so, we're all just trying to work it out. But for me, I do believe that the veil is very thin and that the connection is there, period.
Yeah.
Yeah. How have you prepared for your own death? Do you think about that at all? Has all your work eased you or made you more freaked out?
I never see myself studying death like that, which is weird, right? Because every historian studies dead people. Nobody's alive that we're studying, So, but I don't like researching grieving and bereavement. And the fact that I'm actually researching and writing on the RIP t-shirts, it was for my own coping. Seriously. And what's serendipitous about the whole thing of the research, Jesus Christ, I'm my nephew, is that I saw this call for this, what's called a reflexive study for this book, that you put yourself in as the mourner, and you also, look at it from this kind of scholarly, research perspective. And I thought, man, that's cool. I'm going to pick that book up when that gets printed. That's cool. And they extended the deadline, and then my nephew passes, and I was like, oh my God, I've got to write this thing because I am inside this ritual. And I'm also thinking about it as a scholar, to help me cope, honestly, to help me cope with that. Had I thought about my own death and what I want, I remember hearing about green burial, as in these disposable urns that are made, right? These reusable, well, not reusable, but these biodegradable. That's the word, biodegradable urns. I was like, oh, that's dope. I'll just become a tree. But then I was like, oh, I don't want to be cremated. I don't want to do that. And then I don't want to have where's my tree gonna go? So I'm gonna make my kids, because I have 3 kids, have to look outside at me. I don't know how they're gonna take, my death and all that. So I just think maybe I do still want to be a tree somewhere, anywhere. I don't care. I think that's dope. I want to be a tree. I don't want to be cremated, but just kind of, put me in a shroud, put me in the ground somewhere that you think is nice. But I think more for me is about my funeral, or, whatever you call it. more than what they do with my body, because I know that there's going to be people that want to say stuff about me. But I have told my spouse, I've told my life mate this, and I don't know if I've necessarily told my kids, but it's not a death denying thing. It's just, maybe it just hasn't come up, but it's to them. They get to decide, because they're the ones left here dealing with it. So I'm not going to force a tree on them. I'm not going to force, this kind of stuff on them. You've got the life insurance money, go open up a business. Go buy that car. You know what I mean? Like, live your life. Because I enjoyed you all, and I loved you fiercely when I was alive. One thing I will tell you, with my brother passing a month and how many days? 14 days ago. My nephew passing away 2 years ago. I think that death, people have regret and guilt. And I've decided to live my life even before their passing. Oh, it's about the life. I'm living it. I'm living it. I'm living it. But I think my research, though, is really about calling attention to what's going on with Black folks. That activist arm of it, though. But yeah, I'm living life, and when death comes, it comes. But I'm living it.
Do you believe in an afterlife?
Yeah, I do.
You do, yeah.
I really do. Mm-hmm. All that heaven and hell, not sure. But if this is it, Susan, Jesus Christ.
Preach.
Right? This can't be it. This can't be it. This can't be it.
Unless we're already dead and this is purgatory. And then, we're doing our time in purgatory, and then we get to kick it up.
No, I'm rebuking that. Cut, edit, no, it can't be. But this
Dr. Fletcher, tell people how they can find you. So if they want to reach out to you, if they want to ask questions, and obviously your book comes out in April 2020, and I'll put information about that on HeyHumanPodcast.com's link page as well, but just so that people can hear how to directly find you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm very active on Twitter. So, guys, hit me up at Cami Fletcher, Kami Fletcher, FLETCHER 36 at Twitter. I have a website, CamiFletcher.weebly.com. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fletcher. I could talk with you for hours. I am sure of that. And maybe I'll get a chance if I'm ever in your neighborhood. Let's go, sit and have some conversation for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would love that. Thank you.
It's been my honor. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Please rate and review Hey Human on iTunes and wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks, everybody.